Vivax offers your patients unsurpassed clinical efficacy.
Proven efficacy.
This is absolutely the most efficacious drug your patients can use.
A detail person is basically hired by a pharmaceutical company to educate the doctors about the drugs that they sell. And I use that term educate loosely.
So does Zestran work?
About as well as the others.
Price?
We're more expensive. Actually, we're almost double the cost.
Side effects?
Patients won't shit for a week.
There is one industry detail person for every 11 doctors in the country.
The companies are hiring reps that really have no science or medical background. They are not doctors typically, they are not pharmacists, they are not nurses, they're oftentimes business majors and music majors and drama majors, and they're telling your doctors how to prescribe drugs to you, the patient.
Our drug is clearly the most efficaciousest.
Most practicing psychiatrists get their information about new drugs from pharmaceutical company representatives. The pharmaceutical companies spend $8 billion a year on sales representatives, and those sales representatives give out $8 billion in samples a year. So that there's $16 billion being spent on pharmaceutical reps visiting doctors and touting their latest magic remedy.
Obviously, they are attempting to encourage prescribing, providing not just free samples, but oftentimes providing bonus prescriptions to attract consumers. They may invite physicians to conferences, pay their way, perhaps a little holiday in the Bahamas or some beautiful place.
If a doctor says they're having side effects, or if the doctor says the drug isn't working, typically the sales rep will have a very well-rehearsed response to that question that then will ultimately and hopefully for the rep in that company turn that objection actually into a sale.
Do you have any patients like Betty in your practice?
Well, yes, quite a few.
Well, Dr. Smith, today I'd like to tell you why new Vivax is the drug of choice in patients like Betty. Vivax offers your patients proven, unsurpassed clinical efficacy.
Historically, new medications produce great hope, but we have to make sure there's not too much hype involved as well.
Pharmaceutical companies produce a lot of very beneficial products. The problem is they go well beyond that to create ever new markets and expand the markets that they have. For example, a very high percentage of prescribing is what's called off-label. That means for purposes that were not approved by the FDA. So isn't it strange? We have this whole federal program for testing for safety and efficacy for specific conditions. Then once the drug is approved, it can be prescribed for anything.
The drug industry's put an awful lot of muscle on Congress and on the FDA to keep drugs that are profitable on the market. For a doctor like me, that puts us in an impossible position because drugs that should have been withdrawn may last for months or even years beyond the point where we knew they were dangerous.
A couple of years ago, there were about 600 registered pharmaceutical lobbyists. Today, only a few years later, according to USA Today, there are over 1,200 registered pharmaceutical lobbyists.
There are more lobbyists for the pharmaceutical industry in Washington than there are members of Congress. They have enormous checkbooks, and they can spend that money as they see fit. What do lobbyists do? Well, they influence legislators.
They are paying visits to members of Congress and their staff and sort of influencing them to do things the drug industry way, such as forbidding price controls on prescription drugs. In addition to that, the drug companies themselves give money to the members of Congress, and in return they get much more sympathy, both in terms of legislation that may be pending and in terms of the oversight or lack thereof that the Congress exerts over the FDA.
You've got to start to ask, could we have a better regulatory regime here that could protect the public interest more than the profits of the pharmaceutical companies. You have this entanglement at almost every level of medicine. And where it's most pernicious is at the level of the medical journals, which are at the top of the hierarchy. Medical journals are essentially the record of medical science. And even those journals are heavily dependent on drug company funding through advertising.
Scientific studies that are funded by industry are 5 times more likely to show a result that's favorable to drug companies than if the study was funded by an independent source like the National Institutes of Health.
A pharmaceutical company does a drug test, and it gets, or maybe it does 8 studies, let's say, and 6 of them are negative. Well, it publishes the 2 positive ones. So we only have 2 positive results, and the public and doctors, in fact, the medical journals themselves don't know that in 6 of the 8 trials the drug failed.
The Eli Lilly Corporation, a pharmaceutical company, for nearly 15 years covered up their own internal investigation that showed that anyone on Prozac is 12 times more likely to attempt suicide than those using other antidepressants. Not 12 times more than the average population, 12 times more than those already on other antidepressants. This is a criminal act, and I want to know why these criminals are still walking the streets.
At the beginning, I was diagnosed with dysthymia, by a therapist though, not by a psychiatrist, and then she suggested medication. The psychiatrist diagnosed me with depression, I guess severe depression at one point, and then I started taking Prozac. At one point, I just started feeling, I couldn't point my finger on it, but I just started feeling weird, just not right. I was having really paranoid thoughts. A week later, I just started to act weird. I started to be manic, and I went to work, and everything that everybody said was just like this deep thing. Like, I read into it whatever I wanted to read into it. I would look at people and I would think, wow, I've been really mean to you the whole time I've worked here, which, I mean, I hadn't, but this is what I'm thinking, and I start crying. Meanwhile, the conversation we're having is, how's your day? How was your day? Oh, how are you? Oh, I'm fine. Meanwhile, I'm looking at him like crying. And everyone knew I wasn't quite right.
Under the guise of training, the drug companies pay for professorships. In some cases, they support whole laboratories in universities. They pay for the distribution of major journals, such as the Archives of General Psychiatry, which is sent to all the psychiatrists in the country free of charge because a drug company pays for it.
I left work that day, got on the subway. I had to get off. I couldn't. I went to my friend's job, and I was like, you have to pay for a cab for me to get home because I can't be on the subway. I kept thinking that I smelled. I kept thinking that people were looking at me and talking about me. From there on, and it just got worse and worse.
We're talking about a symbiotic relationship between psychiatry and the drug industry. Reminds one a little bit of what Eisenhower talked about when he left office about the military-industrial complex. You have to watch out for what they're doing because they'll just take over.
I knew, and I think people know, that they're not okay, that there's just something is awry, but there's nothing you can do about it.
The pharmaceutical industry is extraordinarily powerful. They just have very, very deep pockets and pretty much do what they want.
They provide lecturers around the country. They sponsor the vast majority of the credit courses doctors have to take to keep their licenses up to date. They provide free conferences in the conferences of the annual meetings of the psychiatric and medical associations. They'll provide dinners and music and breakfasts. It's like a drug company carnival when you go to the annual American Psychiatric Association meetings.
I knew why. I knew it was the drug, and I felt like hopefully it wouldn't get worse, but it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And a lot of it I just don't remember. Honestly, I feel fortunate to have blacked out, and I don't want to remember, or I don't want to know all of the things that I did. I know enough, and while I know it wasn't me, and while I know it wasn't my fault and it was the effect of the drug, it's still unpleasant to think of yourself doing these things. But it got to the point where apparently I was getting violent. So then they eventually, because of that, they had to call the ambulance to come get me.